everyone. Welcome to Network Your Way to Success, hosted by Grow with Google and Elevate with Google developers. Grow with Google helps people grow their skills, careers, and businesses by offering free digital skills training and tools. We're thrilled to bring this workshop to you in partnership with Elevate with Google developers, a specialized applied skills training program offering monthly upskilling sessions to help people in tech across North America and beyond build on their professional development and career goals. My name is Anna, and I'm an instructor for Grow with Google. I want to thank you on behalf of the team for joining us today. In this workshop, you'll hear from Jason Scott, who is the head of Googler's startup developer ecosystem in the United States. In this role, he serves as Google's cross-functional ecosystem lead, managing Google's US-based accelerator programs and startup developer engagement strategy. Finishing an undergraduate degree at MIT, Jason got his professional start in management consulting at Arthur D. Little. After ADL, Jason moved from Boston to San Francisco to join the YC-backed startup Homejoy, and subsequently went on to pursue an MBA from Stanford Graduate School of Business. During and after GSB, Jason worked independently with a number of startups, eventually joining the investment team at Highland Capital Partners. In addition, he also remains an active seed investor, startup advisor, and the founder of Faction SF, a community for creatives, entrepreneurs, and early stage investors. Now, we want this to be as helpful for you as possible, so Jason will be answering some of your questions live at the end of the workshop. Make sure to post your questions directly under this live stream video. We'll choose the top voted questions, so make sure to upvote your favorites. If you would like to access additional resources for this class, check out the resources section below the video player on the right-hand side. You will also be able to access a replay of this virtual event by clicking on demand on the Grow with Google on-air homepage. Don't forget to post and share on social media using the hashtag Grow with Google. Now I'm going to hand it over to Jason, who's going to dive right in. Take it away, Jason.
Thanks, Anna, and welcome everyone. My name is Jason Scott, head of startup developer ecosystems here at Google in the US, and this is me, an undercover introvert talking to you about networking. But networking has been an important part of my life and honestly a secret weapon in my career. My path, I started my undergraduate at MIT, ended up in consulting, made my way into startups, got an MBA at Stanford, into venture capital, and then at Google. But there's a common thread to all of that. And every job that I've taken is because someone I knew has introduced me to the organization or been there to vouch for me. And I like to say it was the perfect storm of a few key moments where networking really opened doors and provided opportunities for me. So I'm here to talk to you about a few tips for networking and why I think networking doesn't have to be difficult. And if you're introverted like me, can be easy or hopefully easier for you in your career journey. So networking, as I mentioned, the goal for today is really to make networking feel less daunting, less intimidating, more accessible, and honestly, more natural to you. Networking comes in a ton of flavors, and I'm really here to help you get more value out of networking. It doesn't have to feel like work, and it's not just for extroverts. I know you might be rolling your eyes, you might be doubtful, but hopefully after today, you feel at least a little bit more equipped to network in a way that feels organic and natural to you. So I jokingly call this presentation 8.5 tips for effective networking. And hopefully these are useful to you whether you are doing proactive networking. So maybe you're a recruiter, maybe you're a hiring manager, or maybe you're just someone looking for help. But you're sending outbound emails, hoping for a response and hoping for a connection. And hopefully some of these tips can help you be successful. Or maybe you're looking for just tips for organic networking. Maybe you're looking to make serendipitous connections at an event, digital or in person. But hopefully some of these tips can also make that experience easier, more natural, less daunting for you as you go to your first digital conference or in-person conference, and have a strategy for how to make the most of that time. Or lastly, Maybe you're just looking for some help with reactive networking. Maybe you get a ton of inbound requests to meet, requests for advice. If so, I'm a little jealous, but I will say, hopefully some of these tips will also be useful to you as a way to make that feel less daunting as well, and also create value, not just for the people that you're connecting with, but for yourself in your networking. So these tips aim to be helpful regardless of your situation. And again, my goal is for you to take at least one away as a way to make this process of networking your way to success easier for you. So first, everything starts with doing your research. Make sure you do the quick research before you head into any situation involving networking, because it honestly only takes 5 minutes to really just go on LinkedIn, learn something about the person, go on Google search, learn something about the person. You'd honestly be surprised what you find you have in common. I always say the goal is to find the center of the Venn diagram of your interest and the other person's interest. This will obviously be the anchor for the rest of your conversations, and also applies to organic or inbound networking opportunities as well. Maybe you're heading to an event. Just do a quick look at the attendee list and their bios and see what you may want to focus your efforts on connecting with. Maybe you received an inbound email from someone looking to connect with you as well. Take a look at that person's LinkedIn or do a quick Google search for them as well. And you may find an unexpected point of mutual interest that allows you to get more out of the connection on your side. So do the research ahead of time. I promise you it's worth the upfront effort. Next, critically important, be transparent, be upfront. Start with clearly managed expectations of what you are looking to get out of the conversation. Humans can't read minds, so I say don't force them to. Always start with the why. Why is this an opportunity that you would like to support? What are your goals for the meeting? What are you looking to get out of the meeting? And what are you hoping the action items will be at the end? Focus the conversations, not just for you, but out of respect for the other person. They will appreciate it. Your goal is to make the most out of everyone's time. People actually appreciate directness and transparency, and I've found not only appreciate it, but they remember you for it. And even if you don't skip the small talk, you can at least focus it on things that are relevant to you or are of common interest. Perhaps something you found in your 5 minutes of research. Next, critically important to your own happiness, make networking productive for you. Find a way, if you're an introvert like me, to make networking expand your fuel tank versus taking away from it. Integrate networking into your daily activities versus trying to squeeze it in between meetings or between lunches and meals. Leverage a common interest, maybe one that you discovered earlier, or a standard part of your routine as a means to connect, especially if you consider yourself introverted. This makes it so much easier on yourself and allows you to have a little bit of self-compassion in the process. People often enjoy seeing you in your natural element as well, especially if this is an activity that you share in common. So give it a try. Next, I included one of my favorite books. This book was gifted to me when I was 18, actually, on my way to college by a friend. It's called Never Eat Alone by Keith Ferrazzi, and other secrets to success, one relationship at a time. And I often say, never eat alone, but I'm only kidding in that, of course, everyone needs their quiet meal from time to time, but take advantage of your meal times. Have a set recurring coffee, a meal, a lunch, a snack block that you use for networking regularly to just make it easy for you. This strategy works also in a digital first world because honestly, everyone has to eat and everyone appreciates a meeting, even if that meeting is digital, where they can do so and have a conversation, an open conversation, a casual conversation with someone that is talking about a mutual interest. It also allows you to manage your capacity in a very structured and predictable way. As with everything, having a schedule and a routine is of course helpful and predictable. And in a digital first world, perhaps you're a morning person, perhaps you're an evening person, but pick a set time that allows you to bring your best self and minimize distractions and just make that your go-to time for networking. Next, I always always, always appreciate someone who starts with a laugh. Humor builds trust, humor builds bonds, diffuses tension, boosts innovation, and bolsters resilience, even in the hardest of times. There's a lot of research out there that shows the connections that can be formed through humor. And I included one of my favorite books, Humor Seriously, Why Humor is a Secret Weapon in Business and in Life. Because in that book, a lot of tips around how humor can help foster connection, but included a quote that I really, really enjoy, actually by Eric Schmidt, ex-CEO and executive chair of Alphabet. And it goes, "I've learned, often the hard way, that the best way to be taken seriously is to not take yourself too seriously. My teams are always at their best when approaching problems with levity, which entails both humility and optimism, and always engenders trust. Plus, it's more fun." So I encourage you to find a way to introduce levity into your networking conversations. Take a risk, maybe make a bad joke, but I promise you, by introducing humor, you're able to connect on a much deeper level and a much more trusting level with the people that you're networking with. The next one is simple, maybe obvious, but often, often, often forgotten. Take notes. Your future self will thank you so, so, so much. I thank myself all the time for the notes that I took because honestly, my memory is not that great. So jot down some notes, some talking points immediately before, and a few follow-ups during and immediately after each meeting. Don't force yourself to rely solely on memory to remember that action item, that person you promised to connect them to. If you have it in your notes, you will always be able to reference them later. And I promise you, it's not weird. And if anything, it shows you're interested in what the other person has to say. Personally, I often refer back to my notes even months, years later, as a way to remember interesting touch points with another person in my network. And the next one, of course, I will say, pass the baton, because you should always be networking your network. I often ask at the end of each meeting, who else can I connect you to help you achieve some of your goals? Regardless of the context, I'm sure there's someone that you could connect the individual to that might be beneficial to them. And best practice, of course, always make intros double opt-in. Both sides should always agree and be interested in connecting. And it should always be a mutual benefit. But it always allows you to expand and grow your network in an organic and efficient way. And most importantly, make everything easier. And finally, pay it forward. You really do get what you put in. I included the movie. You might remember it from the early 2000s, Pay It Forward. The movie had a profound impact on me in terms of how I think about approaching relationships with other people. But honestly, real networking is about finding ways to make other people more successful. That's a quote from Keith Ferrazzi of the book that I mentioned earlier, Never Eat Alone. But it's true. The more value you're putting into your network, the more value you will eventually receive from it. So think about ways that you can start by putting value in and know that you'll receive that value back 10x in the future. And the half, the 8.5 tips, this one's the half. I will say, when all else fails, just think, how can I be known as the best supporting actor or actress within my network? And remember that this is your ultimate goal. Networking is all about helping others, and you always want to be known as best supporting actor or actress within your network. I've included some resources that I mentioned earlier. There are many good reads, and I encourage you to check them out. The first was Never Eat Alone by Keith Ferrazzi. The next was Humor Seriously by Naomi Bagdonis and Jennifer Aaker. And then, of course, one of our favorite classic movies, Pay It Forward, real cute movie from early 2000s. Encourage you all to think about these books and some of the tips within them when you're approaching networking and a way to optimize, but also make networking feel organic, fun, and engaging for both you and the person that you're engaging with. I've also included a list of resources from Stanford Graduate School of Business, my alma mater. These resources include career resources and networking workshops, and a lot of tips and tricks for thinking about getting that new job, making that new hire, or exploring this new career opportunity. In addition to potentially helping you get a new job, networking can also be a great opportunity to meet new people and learn more about industry that interests you. If you'd like to learn more skills you can apply to a career or a job search, Google has a variety of training resources that you can access remotely from anywhere. There are several different learning paths and options, so we'll talk about these tools and determine which ones make the most sense for you right now. First, this workshop today is just the first of 9 workshops catered to help those looking for a new job or seeking a career change. We encourage you to sign up for some of the upcoming workshops that can help set you up for success or teach you valuable skills for your job search. Part of Grow with Google's new resources for job seekers. Check out g.co/grow/job seekers to learn more. Next, we also have a ton of other workshops to continue your learning at Grow with Google On Air. You can check out a variety of virtual workshops, all tailored to help you during your job search and journey to grow your professional skills. We have over 60 plus currently available on demand, which means you can watch them at any time. Visit g.co/growonair to learn more. And finally, check out our Applied Skills Training, brought to you by Elevate with Google developers. This program offers monthly virtual upskilling sessions to help people in tech across North America and beyond build on their professional development and career goals through content catered to the themes of transitioning to a new career, growing your career, and growing yourself as an individual. Visit goo.gle/elevate for more information. And that's it. This wraps up the presentation portion of today's workshop. I'm now going to give you all a few minutes to ask any questions you may have, and I'll come back to answer them live. Please post them directly under the video player in the Q&A section. Thank you. Hi, everyone. I'm excited to answer a few of the questions you've asked throughout the session. We received quite a few of them. Remember, if we don't get to your question, we'll be going back and answering all the questions on Grow with Google On Air page below the virtual events shortly after it concludes. So diving into some of the questions. First, we had a question from Mac around what sorts of questions could I ask in a networking session that would give me the most value? Would it be about relevant skills, opportunities, networking techniques, etc.? I'd say, Mac, in my opinion, honestly, the single most valuable question you can ask comes really at the end, and it's truly about fostering those ongoing connections. So make sure you always ask, is it okay if I send you an email if I have another question as I make progress? Because you don't want to put yourself on the spot and force yourself to ask all those questions now. What you're really trying to do is foster an ongoing connection. Or a similar question that officially adds this person to your network, right? So even if it's simply request to add that person on LinkedIn, or be sure to leave room for some sort of future connection, you really just want to make sure that you're facilitating that. Otherwise, I'd say the second most important question, honestly, would be around just understanding the person's path and their current priorities and their goals to allow you to focus the conversation in the time that you do have. And if you can find a connection point, this will, of course, open the door to many future conversations. Up next, we had a question from Anisha. Anisha's question was, how can I ask help from a connection or have them use their network to help me? Great question, Anisha. I would say, kind of going back to the tips, just be upfront with who you're looking to connect with. Be specific as you can, and be as targeted as you can, and ask directly at the end of the conversation or the meeting. Maybe you don't know who specifically you're looking to connect with, but if you can share as many details as you have with respect to that ideal profile of the individual, it really will help the person you're talking to currently identify some other folks within their network that might be useful to you. And if you could save them some effort in doing so, you make networking not only easier for you, but easier for them. Up next, we had a question from Farah. Farah says, when using proactive networking on LinkedIn, for example, how would one exploit the opportunity when there's a character limit? This is a good one. When there's a character limit that prevents us from using many of these tips. So ultimately, you identify the problem, right? You have the character limit. So ultimately, you're trying to get them to get to a different platform, whether it be a question, a conversation, or through a different communication channel, right? So what I would say is always keep it short and sweet. I think we always talk about, to my founders, particularly when you're telling stories or trying to get another conversation with an investor or a conversation with a future customer, you'll lose their attention if you don't capture it within the first 15 to 30 seconds. So keep that first one short and sweet, because your ultimate goal is just to get another conversation, right? Especially if you're just communicating over LinkedIn. So stay to the point. Your goal, like I said, is to get them intrigued enough to ask for more information. You want them to say, oh, I would love to learn more about this, or I would love to connect and learn more about this. And don't send an essay, of course, in your first correspondence. Luckily, I guess LinkedIn will prevent you from doing that. But I'd say in general, even if it's your first email, cold email to someone, no need to send an essay the first time, right? You want them to actually open it and have time to read it, not open it and say, oh, this is lengthy, I need to look at this later, or skim through and not actually get to the meat of what you're looking to ask. And I would say you always, as I mentioned earlier, close with, is it okay if I send you an email with more information, right? So ultimately, you're trying to get to that next conversation or open up the door to that person's network. We had another question. It's, what is the best way to build one's network as a student? I remember the days of networking as a student. I know it's tough. For sure. What I would say is, first and foremost, though, it can be to your advantage. Everyone really enjoys work supporting students. Everyone can relate to being a student. So I would say leverage the fact that you are a student, right? And be explicit about that. Everyone loves helping students. I will say, even in my days, my summer after graduating from undergrad, I often still opened with, I'm a student at XYZ, because it really does yield a higher response rate oftentimes, because everyone can relate with being a student, and it's a time in everyone's life that they can remember and empathize with. So I would say highlight something that the person has maybe written or said as a reason to connect. I mentioned earlier, and you'll hear us say it often, humans love flattery, so find a way to incorporate that in. And honestly, be a little shameless in that. And it's not awkward to give someone a compliment. In fact, it's just kind. So also I would say, secondarily, something people forget, particularly when they're students, is don't forget to leverage the resources that you have access to and databases that you have access to while you're a student and while you can. You probably don't realize, or maybe you do, but I definitely didn't realize just how valuable some of those resources were and could be today. But now that I no longer have access to many of them and am a graduate, it's when I really need them the most. So leverage the fact that you're a student, and don't be afraid to give someone a compliment or give someone a little bit of flattery accordingly. There was a comment from Cheryl. Cheryl says, I'm a 61-year-old woman trying to get back into the workforce after managing my own small retail LLC business for 5 years. My background experience is as an executive director in public transit and tourism. And her question is, what are my chances of ever getting an executive position in one of these fields at my age? So Cheryl, what I will say is, obviously, I can't speak to the chances. I can definitely empathize with your situation. My mom, my aunts, 4 aunts, my mom, my grandparents, they were all retired military. And I remember very clearly growing up that transition from being in the military to civilian was quite tough for them. It's obviously a different situation than yours, but there were some parallels and some analogous challenges with trying to get people to understand your experience and empathize with your experience, both your personal experiences, but also your professional experiences, and making that jump. And I just remember the difficulties that they faced rejoining the civilian workforce. And so, what I will say is, like, while different from your scenario, of course, the thing that I'm trying to highlight is that I realize that there are biases and challenges that will be quite daunting for you. And of course, you can probably attest to it not being easy. My advice would be to find someone and try to find someone who perhaps has been in your shoes, someone who would be willing to kind of give you a chance based off of a shared experience. I'm sure you can find that individual, and I'm always happy to be a thought partner if I can, and helping you think of individuals there. But find someone who might empathize a little bit with your experience, maybe not directly, but because they have had similar challenges of taking a break from the workforce or coming from a different workforce that is making a career switch, or returning back to a former career. Alternatively, I would say, perhaps I approach most of my life like a step function, and thinking about, and for those who don't know step function, it's basically, how do you think of steps to your end goal instead of a straight line to connecting those dots? Can there be steps that get you there? And so perhaps you can approach this like a step function, and think, like, what is an interim step that you can that can get you in the door, to allow you to show them what you can do ultimately, right? And combat those biases that we were mentioning earlier. Perhaps you can propose, I've done this in the past when I jumped into venture capital, and also into a few startups. I propose contract engagements, apprenticeships, or things that lower the risk for the other side, but also give you a chance to really show what you can do. And perhaps, again, you can ultimately find a temporary role, maybe covering for someone, or through, like I said, a contract engagement or apprenticeship, or as I mentioned, covering for someone that's on leave. That will ultimately get your foot in the door, because that is your ultimate goal, to get your foot in the door so that you can show what you can do, and really prove what you can do. So good luck on that, Cheryl, as well. We had another question that came up. How can I create a network in a new field if I'm trying to use my translatable skills from a different industry or to a different industry? So what I would say, honestly, again, this is incredibly relatable. I know I've personally made many career hops, career jumps, and probably not my last. We'll continue to make many of them. But I would say, I would be willing to say, if you're looking for a network in a new field specifically, that network honestly probably exists, and I'd be willing to bet that that network exists already. So basically, your goal is to find the hub. Who are the hubs? What are the hubs within the network that allow you to be efficient with your time as you're networking? So who are the community organizers? Who are the thought leaders? Where are the events that are happening, digital or in person, that are happening in this field, or jokingly in the field, I would say. And make the most of your time by finding these hubs in the ecosystem, right? Sometimes you may have to be a little shameless in your outreach, and that's okay. I think for when you're talking about your career and your personal progression, it's okay to be a little shameless sometime, and not to be scared to come across as a little shameless, because ultimately this is your well-being, right? And your family's well-being in that. So don't be afraid to shamelessly reach out to a handful of individuals to help you find these hubs, or who might be the hubs within this network. And always ask, who else do you think I should be meeting with? again, especially once you find someone who is a hub in the network, I'm sure they can rattle off 4 to 5 names, probably with a lot of ease, of folks that you should be connecting with respect to expansion within this network. And of course, this will give you some guidance as to who the true hubs are, right, within the new network. So you can continue to hone in on who are those people that I really need to keep close, right, within this new industry that can teach me a lot, connect me to a lot of people, and provide a lot of value ultimately. We had another question from Apurva. The question was, how would you recommend reaching out to Google employees? Again, this extends beyond just Google employees. This just extends to reaching out as a whole, particularly to people that you might not know. And I'd say it's first and foremost important to remember that no individual is the same, right? No person has a preferred way to be reached out to. No one has a preferred sense of communication. We actually joke in a lot of our programs when we're often trying to find ways to keep people connected. There's always the debate of what platform we're going to use, and we never reach resolution, right? Because no one is the same with respect to that. So I generally advise you to look for cues, right? First and foremost, leverage all the networks and channels that the employee is currently active on, or that person's currently active on. Maybe they post quite often on LinkedIn. I post quite often on LinkedIn, but I'm a lot less active on things like Twitter. But maybe they are very active on Twitter, or perhaps they blog really often on Medium, right? Or attend a lot of meetups on Meetup, or speak at a lot of events. But really try to understand, where does that person hang out most often? Hang out in quotation marks in a digital context. Where do they hang out digitally most often, or in person most often, right? And so that should be your first touch point. You want to be where they are. Whether that is LinkedIn, Twitter, Medium, speaking at events or meetups, but find out where they are, and just similar to in-person networking, put yourself there, right, and try to reach out to them there. We have another question around, I'm changing careers. I have no experience in my new field outside of the classroom. I have a hard time, reaching out to people in my new field because I don't know what to say without coming across as needy and stupid. I will come back to the word choice there, but coming across as needy and stupid. And I am an introvert and suffer from imposter syndrome. Any help is appreciated. Well, first and foremost, I want to go back to the word choice there. I will be willing to bet that you do not come across as needy, and definitely don't come across as stupid. And ultimately, I would not, going back to what I was saying earlier, I would not worry about those things, right? We're often our own worst critics. We're often our own, we give ourselves the harshest critiques with respect to all things. And so I promise you that the other person is probably not perceiving you the same way that you might be fearing you're perceived. And I would say, of course, I also, as a fellow introvert, find engaging with individuals to be daunting, exhausting, definitely draining on my fuel tank. And definitely we all as humans suffer from imposter syndrome. I will say that if you're suffering from imposter syndrome, probably in the right place. Ultimately, you want to surround yourself with people who make you feel challenged, make you feel a little uncomfortable, make you feel like an imposter if you're looking to grow. So first and foremost, I would say, don't worry about it. I think you're, just from the thoughtfulness in your question, doing something right. But what I would say, specific to this scenario, what is it about the person or individual that made you excited to connect in the first place, right? How did you encounter them? Was it, did they write an article that you found interesting, publish a paper you found interesting? Did they give a talk that you found interesting? And use that as the touch point, right? Humans are suckers for flattery. I mentioned this many, many times because I fundamentally believe it, myself included, but all of us, right, are suckers for flattery. Think of the last time someone gave you an unsolicited compliment and how it made you feel. So I would say try starting with that compliment, that unsolicited compliment, right? And it doesn't have to be fictitious, right? Because there was something about that person that drew you to them and made you want to connect with them in the first place. So just don't be afraid to be vulnerable in that and open in that, right? I would say it's a fantastic, fantastic way to break the ice. And I 100% promise you, you won't come across as needy. You're definitely not stupid. If anything, you come across as kind. And everyone can use a little bit of kindness. So I encourage you to don't be afraid to incorporate a little bit of flattery, and don't be afraid to incorporate a compliment as a means to connect with someone. You'll be surprised with how much that might help. Moving forward, we had a question from John. Very tactical question from John. What are some tools or websites you would recommend in order to find meetups in my local area to connect with people who have similar interests and goals? John, good question. I will say, love to double click into that and understand who you mean when you say people with similar interests and goals. That will help both me and you to get a little bit more narrow in your search, or me to get a little bit more narrow in my advice, and you and specific in my advice, and you to get a bit more narrow and specific in your search. But what types of people are you looking to connect with? Are they developers? Are they technologists? Are they students? Are they founders? There are so many communities out there. Don't feel the need. I actually made this mistake in my career at one point, feeling the need that I needed to always create the community from scratch, versus just connecting communities that always exist, that already exist. And I'd say if you're just getting started, don't be afraid to just take a look and find communities that already exist out there, right? There are so many, and that you should check out. Even Google runs communities around the world. We have developer communities of technologists, our Google developer experts, our Google developer groups. We have communities for students, developer student clubs, and many other on campus. We have communities for founders. So I would say find who are the people, going back to my point earlier, who are already the hubs in this ecosystem and who are already creating these communities, and leverage those existing communities. No need for you to try and invent a community from scratch or create a community from scratch, right? There are a lot of people like Google, a lot of companies like Google that are already kind of bringing all the people into the room. So just tap into those resources and those wells of resources to save yourself some time. And we have a question from Sarah. The question from Sarah, do you use any tools to organize your contacts? So Sarah, I might have to disappoint you a little bit, and I apologize for that, mainly because I am pretty old school with respect to things. I don't have a Rolodex on my desk. No offense to anyone who might have a Rolodex on your desk. But I also like kind of making things myself in my own way, and don't necessarily use a lot of the new cool hip tools, I'd say, for things like CRM and contact management, and managing your network. So yeah, of course, I'm pretty old school in that. But I would say figure out what is the easiest for you. I find it honestly easiest to simply just leverage existing tools. I make sure I leverage LinkedIn. LinkedIn is, most people have a LinkedIn profile around the world, in most countries, and so it's a great way to just keep contacts organized. I don't need to create my own database. LinkedIn, it just is my database, and I just make sure that I leverage it accordingly. Gmail contacts, of course, for just email contacts and stuff like that, because there was a lot of thought. Honestly, my opinion is there were a lot of thought and a lot of time put into building these tools and these platforms. So I'll just kind of adapt them to my own use cases. I will say though, of course, as someone who manages founder programs and startup programs, I do see a lot of startups in the space. And if you're looking for something a little bit more advanced, maybe like a relationship CRM, and something that can help you keep track of not just the contacts, but the engagements with those contacts. There are definitely some interesting options depending on your use case. There was a startup in one of my programs that's kind of one of my favorite in the space, and they happen to be an alumnus of my Accelerator for Black Founders program here in North America. They're called 4 Degrees, so number 4, and then DEGREES.ai, and they are a relationship management platform for networking, particularly in a professional setting. But I'll say just try a few and see what works for you. And again, ultimately, your goal is not to overcomplicate things and create more work. Your goal is to make you find a method that makes things easier and less work for you. So I would encourage you not to get too caught up in what tool you're using, and just if email and LinkedIn and these things are working for you, just use those. A question from James. James is early in his career, and he said he's a little bit insecure about reaching out and asking for help from those further in their career, because he doesn't feel like he can give anything back to them. And how can he give value to those relationships? James, this is an insecurity we all face, right? There will always be someone more senior, more awesome, more experienced, right, than us, no matter how far we progress in our career. For those who happen to be watching space travel today, now I'm see someone like Bezos going into space, and I'm like, oh, well, how would I approach that, right, scenario if I wanted to connect and ask about that scenario, right? So you will always feel these feelings, I would say, but I would question the premise of your question. I'd say around how can you give value to these relationships, and I'd say there are two things to keep in mind. First and foremost, people 100% enjoy and respond incredibly well to flattery, like I mentioned earlier. And also, number two, people love opportunities to mentor passionate and driven younger versions of themselves or individuals that they know. Ultimately, think back to the last time someone, again, said, hey, I was so impressed by this work that you're doing. I would love to chat more about how I can get there too. And think about how that made you feel, right? It's gratifying, it's rewarding, and it really makes the person receiving that feedback feel great, right? It can oftentimes make my day to hear something like that, right? So you are creating value, right? Even if that value is just in making someone feel validated, or confident in what they're doing and that they're doing something well. So even if that value is a little less tangible and a little bit more abstract, it's not necessarily less valuable. And so I would say, if you're reading something that the person has written, or of course, watch some talks that they've given, and find that common thread that we mentioned earlier to connect on. And I promise you that everyone loves, again, as I mentioned earlier, a bit of flattery from time to time. And then, of course, finally, don't underestimate your own network. Even if you're junior, right, or even if you're younger or junior or new to a space, I'm sure that there's value even in your network, right? And the most senior individuals in organizations, they're still often looking to recruit and hire junior talent, and maybe that is their user base and customer base, and they're looking to learn more from there. But think about your network and how your network can be valuable to those individuals. And if you know anyone or any community that may be a great candidate to connect them with, offer it. I would say make sure you're offering to help them expand their network in the same way they're helping you expand yours. And it's a great way to create mutual value in a conversation. And if you're bad at thinking of those things on the spot, think of it ahead of time. And think about, what are some things, some people, some networks, some communities that I could potentially offer based upon this person's priorities in the moment. Our next question is from Tia. Tia says, how would one go about finding or reaching out to people that are higher up or more established in the industry to help oneself level up? So this is a little bit related to the last one. So of course, Tia, hopefully some of my last points are helpful for you. But I would say, again, don't underestimate the power of the tools that exist out there. Don't underestimate the power of LinkedIn. I would also not be afraid to search for papers, talks, conferences within the space that you're working in that this person has participated in. Check, or if you don't know the individual and you're just looking for individuals in this industry that you're searching within, check out the authors on those papers. Definitely don't be afraid to check out a speaker list at a conference, or even the guests and sponsors for those events. And oftentimes that can be incredibly fruitful. If I'm looking to, let's say, learn more about a space that is novel to me. I ran a program recently on voice technology, which is a space I knew nothing about. And honestly, I took the same strategy, right? Like, who are the people that are writing the papers, hosting the podcast, doing the talks within that space? And where going back to my point earlier, where do they hang out digitally? Are they hanging out on LinkedIn? Are they hanging out on Twitter? And how can I foster a connection that is where I'm both very specific in what I'm looking to get from that connection, but also offering something to share. Again, even if that offering is just a smile and a compliment or a laugh. And I would say, if you can connect with one of these individuals or someone on their team, maybe a direct report on their team, it'll of course help you level up incredibly quickly, right? Level up in quotation marks. But definitely, if that person is a little bit out of reach, figure out who reports to them, who's on their team, and use that as an entryway, right? You're basically just looking for a door, and that doorway will let you in to the conversation. Next question from Rico. I've done in-person networking, but trying to explore online tactics. Any tips? Well, Rico, of course, online is weird. We are, excuse me, we are transitioning to what are interesting times, I think, but I will say it's not going anywhere. But I would say take advantage of the fact that everyone's learning right now, right? Like, all the people you're trying to reach out to are also trying to understand how do they engage with people online. It's funny. There are a lot of jokes around the venture capital industry and investing in startups, but it used to be such an in-person, proximity-based industry. And folks are saying that this has kind of been a forcing function to force investors, for instance, to go find founders versus the other way around. And so I would say, similar to that analogy, in your scenario, this is a forcing function for everyone to go find people and be a little bit more intentional and proactive, and use that to your advantage, right? Online networking, of course, as I mentioned, can be tough and intimidating, but think of the opportunities, right, within online networking, and how you can leverage it to your advantage, right? You can be much more targeted in who you're trying to reach out to. You're not just going to a room and a conference or an event and having to find them. You can actually be very specific in who you're reaching out to and who you're looking to talk to, and you can control the narrative, right? You can control that message. You can control, you're not on the spot trying to make small talk, right? You can really be specific in in the words that you use, do the research ahead of time, and control the timing of that as well, right? I would say follow some of the tips I laid out, of course, like do your research ahead of time. The internet is a powerful place for finding out a lot about people. What have they talked about in the past? And again, find those touch points earlier. Find a common thread. Find something that maybe you have in common or that you overlap with, and then don't be afraid. Be a little bit shameless, as I mentioned earlier, making that cold outreach. There's no shame in a cold outreach as long as it's done in a way that is appropriate, right? And so what I will say is, try, as we mentioned earlier, figure out where the person hangs out online. So find them find all of their platforms and figure out which one they're using the most. Are they most active on Twitter? Are they most active on LinkedIn? And then make sure you're just clear and very transparent in your objective, right? What are you specifically looking to get out of this conversation? And be upfront with that. No need to sandwich it with too much of chatter, right? Just be very upfront with what you're looking to get out from the conversation. Similar to if you're writing a paper, make sure you have your thesis at the top. Make sure you are very clear with what you're looking to get out of that conversation and the objective that you have for it. And then, of course, don't be afraid to sprinkle in a little bit of flattery and a little bit of humor. As I mentioned, humor builds trust, and you can definitely, even in a digital email or chat context, introduce humor in a way that fosters a little bit of trust or at least intrigue. And ultimately, your goal is just to get that person to say, I'm intrigued. I want to learn more about this person, or I want to have a second conversation. And I promise you'll have more success than you may think with that. And then next, we had a question from Christian. So Christian says, how would you recommend staying in touch with those that you have met through networking? After a coffee chat, what can you do to stay connected? Ultimately, Christian, figure out what's organic to you, and make sure you allow for organic ways to stay in touch. So if LinkedIn is the best way for you to stay, if you're the type of person like me that in the morning you're kind of scrolling through LinkedIn or like commenting on people's things or sharing things, then make sure you add that person on LinkedIn and ask before then that meeting, can you add them on LinkedIn? Or similar thought process with respect to Twitter, right? That said, I would say don't be afraid to keep them updated on the progress you've made. Definitely, I find that by having those common touch points that you identified, you can find out what they're interested in, right? What they're naturally interested in, and use that as a means to provide them with curated aspects of things that you find or viewer updates that you know they will find interesting, right? So maybe they're an investor and you have a startup, or you know startups in a specific space that they invest in. Don't be afraid to share, hey, I saw this cool startup in this space that I know you're interested in or that you invest in. Or maybe that they have this problem, maybe it's a recruiting problem, company problem, etc. You come across a cool article, maybe, or a journal outlet that is talking about this problem that they face. Use that as a touch point, right? Because you've uncovered a common interest or a problem that they have, and that is your secret weapon, right, for a way to continue to create value for this person and kind of be known as a person that is there to support and create value within your network. I would say, in addition to that, definitely opportunity to share related things that you discuss in the conversation. Always in a conversation with a few questions that allow for ongoing connection. As I mentioned earlier, would you be okay if I gave you an update after I tackle this challenge? Or would you be okay if I have another question if I reach out to you again? Definitely end the conversation with a door open, an explicit door open. Because once you get that commitment, then it's okay, right? And then you don't have to worry about if it's okay for you to reach out or send them an update on your progress. I would also, as I mentioned earlier, ask them, like, is there someone that I can connect you to? Is there someone that some way I can be helpful? And see what they say. And that could be a great natural way for you to follow up as well. And then, like I said, as long as you're confident that what you're sharing is of interest to the person and creating value, providing value to that person, I wouldn't be afraid to share. I would, and I would, again, be a little bit, I know I sound like a broken record, but allow you to be a little bit shameless in that, in what you share. And everyone enjoys a person within their network who provides value, and of course curates great, useful, relevant content. I sure do, right? People know, for instance, the things that I'm interested, the spaces I'm interested in, the types of startups I'm interested in, the geographies I'm interested in. So I love when people, again, do my homework for me and share with me an interesting startup or an interesting article or an interesting update that I maybe missed or maybe I haven't yet read. And it also shows that they were listening. It shows that they're really putting in work, right, to pay it forward in that relationship, which again, just makes me want to help them even more, of course. So I think that we're running on time. So I would say this wraps up our Q&A for today. But thank you all for joining us today on Networking Your Way to Success. Hopefully you all learned something new, or maybe something you already knew, but just needed that extra reminder or that extra vote of confidence to do. You can, of course, find all of our follow-up resources on the same page you're watching in the resources tab. So check the resources tab above the video player accordingly. You can also access today's recording, the recording of today's session, by clicking on demand on g.co/grow-on-air. Again, you can access today's recording by clicking on demand on g.co/grow-on-air to check this out. Maybe you missed part of it, or maybe you want to share with your team or our follow-up in the future. And we'll, of course, be sending a follow-up email with a survey, and this will help you or help us. So appreciate you all filling that out regarding your experience in the virtual workshop today. Of course, it's really important for us to get that feedback so we can quickly improve our sessions and provide as much value to you all as we can, and offer the content that is most relevant and helpful to you and other learners. And so I'd say thanks all for joining me. Hopefully, again, you found this helpful. Feel free to add me on LinkedIn. I would be remiss if I didn't offer that, or Twitter. It's just Jason Scott, and I am very, very happy to be able to be supportive with you all and be a hub within your networks. So please do let me know how I can help. And we're here to help you all be successful and network your way to success. So thank you all for joining Grow with Google today, and I will see you all next time. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.